Drummers Against implied timekeeping, Richard D'Alvis, the 5 greatest drummers in grunge. I want to do a video about grunge in particular because it's not a defined term to the extent metal is. But I think a lot of these drummers I want to talk about represent a specific style, and it should be noted for all of you younger drummers to know a little bit about who they were and what they were doing. Now, most people purists, you might say, would say that grunge is only from a certain geographic area, particularly Seattle, Vancouver, or Portland, Oregon. And that's not really fair, but it is true that a lot of the new sounds in the late 80s, or mid to late 80s, were coming out of the Pacific Northwest, no question. And so grunge does have a certain geographic component to it. But I want to talk about certain drummers that aren't even within that geographic area. And I want younger drummers to know what was going on during this period. And grunge, in and of itself, is not really defined in many ways. It's not specified. It's hard to always put your finger on it. And I just want to kind of give you my take on it, where I'm coming from, and qualify it as best I can. All right, so these are the 5 greatest drummers in grunge. The first drummer I want to discuss is a guy named Josh Sindar. Josh was the drummer for the band Tad. He is from Seattle, just like Tad was, and he's the second drummer. The first drummer was a guy named Wine, who was an adequate player. But when Tad broke to a big label with the album Inhaler, they were just on the verge of being big because they had toured with Nirvana, and Josh joined the band on the Inhaler album. And he was just a fantastic, heavy drummer with a lot of cymbals. He could structure his drums to Tad's style, vocally especially. Tad was just absolutely a fantastic band. He was a fantastic singer. He's my favorite band of the grunge era. And I want to give a special acknowledgement to Josh Sindar. He's only on 2 records, Inhaler, and I think it was Infrared Riding Hood. And he's all over the record, just doing great things, and in the style of grunge he exemplified it well. And he was acknowledged, but I want to give a special acknowledgement here on my channel for those guys who are either into jazz or pop or other stylings. You've got to acknowledge these grunge guys. A lot of them did great things, and Josh Sindar of Tad is definitely in there. Number 5 for me. Number 4, now this gets weird. There's a guy named Ray Washam of the band Scratch Acid. Now, Scratch Acid was a kind of a noise band out of Austin, Texas, and they're not grunge. So there's a little bit of a conflict here. And Ray happened to have played with Tad at some point as well. Maybe an offshoot of Tad later on. But Ray influenced a lot of drummers everywhere. And interesting as well, you know, I liked Scratch Acid when they came out in the mid-80s. I didn't love them. I liked them. I didn't think they were that great, but a lot of people did, and I remember that well. And they have a couple of records that are influential for a lot of grunge music. Now, why that is complicated, but Ray is not a grunge drummer per se, but a lot of the elements he brought with the band Scratch Acid, and for those of you who do not know them, you have to know this band. They're very important from Austin, Texas. But Ray had a profound effect on a lot of grunge drummers. I know this for a fact from a lot of my friends who were living up in Portland. They loved him, they loved Scratch Acid, even though Ray didn't play heavy enough grunge drumming. So he's got to be included, all right? So that's Ray Washam of the band Scratch Acid, and later, Tad. with Tad Doyle. The third greatest grunge drummer is a famous guy, and there's no question everyone loved him, and that was Dale Crover of the band The Melvins. Now that is a band that I can't say enough great things about it. The first album, when that thing came out, it was called Gluey, I remember, Torch, Treatments, and Uzma was the next one. Both of those first two albums, Dale was just completely fantastic on those two records, because the Melvins sound was intricate to what he was playing. They were connected. You couldn't have one without the other, and Dale made the sound of the band. Plus, he was, I don't want to say lyrical in his fills, but he was kind of all over the place, but within a control type of style. Because the Melvins were, and they started off heavy, and then they got kind of drony and lower, by the third album. But Dale Crover needs to be looked at. The drum magazines in the late 80s, early 90s got wind of Dale's greatness. Modern Drummer started doing an article on him and stuff, and I was so happy about that, because he was unheralded, but he was a great, and he is still going. Know him and like him a lot, all right? Dale Crover. And number two, the greatest grunge player is Dave Grohl. Now I have to mention Dave Grohl because Nevermind is a fantastic record, and obviously it represented grunge at that period in 1991. But of course, the opening riff for any drummer is to know Smells Like Teen Spirit. But Dave Grohl, the follow-up to the album, The Heart-Shaped Box, that track for a drummer in grunge is, to me, the best. Absolutely fantastic. And I see a lot of comments and things about Dave Grohl for the past 20 years, and he's made fun of it, mocked, and everything else. And this is really unfair to this guy. I don't care how big the Foo Fighters are. He cannot be denied, first of all, as one of the greatest grunge drummers ever, just for the fact of what he did on Heart-Shaped Box to me, because of the loud playing and then the soft playing, which represented Nirvana. And no matter where I was, and I had been playing 30 years before Nirvana came around, not 30, but 20 years for sure, more, 25 years, I respect Dave Grohl a great deal because he's creative. That is the key thing. You can say, well, he was just doing one thing and he did it well, but he helped Nirvana creatively. It was very important because the first drummer was nowhere near the drummer that he was. All right? And again, I want to mention Heart-Shaped Box proves Dave Grohl is absolutely unbelievable. Number two on my list. And now we get to number one, the greatest grunge drummer of all times to me. And this is a complete confusing thing to discuss because I have two drummers. And you get into a little bit of what do I mean. The drummer that really captures grunge, and I think it is a grunge band, and it's a band that I can't stand, and personally I never liked them at all, which was Stone Temple Pilots. Eric Kretz, the drummer. As I say, this is a conflict, but if you're talking great grunge drummers, how can I make Eric Kretz so great? Well, the first album, Core, when that came out, I think around 93, 94, grunge was at its peak, you might say, and clearly Stone Temple Pilots came out of Orange County, California, Southern California. And as I say, I was not a big fan of the band at all. I didn't like what they were making, I didn't like what they were doing. But Eric Kretz used to get to me all the time because I used to try to be critical about him, and I couldn't. Because in some ways, I always talk about firepower in a drummer as being the most important thing, which is kind of a complicated thing. Eric Kretz did not have firepower, but I still couldn't dismiss him because his time, in my book, is untouchable. And I want those drummers who don't agree with me, or younger drummers who don't know who he is, take a look at Eric Kretz, Stone Temple Pilots, 1993 does MTV Unplugged. That was when MTV was putting all sorts of bands and doing a kind of an acoustic thing. And I watched it, and I looked back on it a few days ago, and the song The Big Empty, which was I think their second album, still grunge, more pop, but the first album, Core, makes him grunge, regardless of your opinion of it. To me, it makes it grunge. The follow-up single, I think, was The Big Empty. Watch him play that at 1993's MTV Unplugged. Flawless. Absolutely flawless. And I begrudgingly have to admit, he's a killer because of the time. All right? So he's number one on my list, over Dave Grohl as the greatest grunge drummer. And of course, I mentioned Dale Crover and Ray Washam of Scratch Acid and Josh Sindar, who later joined Tad. Now there's another guy, and now I want to put him at the top. Why? Because of the influence he had on a lot of grunge drummers. And his band was not grunge, it was post-metal. And that's the drummer in Helmet. And that drummer is John Stanier. When I heard Strap It On, the album, 1990 I think it was, or 89 maybe, that album just knocked me out. I went to go see them play in Los Angeles before they hit the big label, and I was floored. John Stanier was really taking it to new levels of creativity and power. But he's not grunge in the sense of the five I've just mentioned. It's post-metal. So why am I putting him on the list of the greatest grunge drummers? Because he had a lot of influence on many other grunge drummers, even though the band he was in wouldn't be considered grunge. And he's clearly different than Eric Kretz of Stone Temple Pilots, which could be argued is not a grunge band, but based on the first album, Core, it is a grunge album. So these are my favorites and should be looked at and analyzed forever, especially if you're a drummer. The album Strap It On Again by Helmet, the first album I think, is an absolute fantastic record. I was playing it in 1990 I think a lot. I liked it. I liked what they were doing. I saw them live and he was an ace. So again, these are the 5+1 greatest grunge drummers of all time. If you have any questions or opinions or comments, I welcome them as long as they're respectful in the comment section. I'll answer anything you have based on this video. And for those of you who are visiting for the first time, I teach in a very particular way in the open-handed position, and I'd like you to take a look at seeing what I'm doing. I want to increase power, independence, and most importantly, creativity in your playing. And I have a very particular way I go about it. So I'll go through my catalog. And welcome, always. And if you haven't, please subscribe, because your subscription is the support for me to continue. And thank you for that always. And these sort of things that I'm doing, these 5 greatest punk or 5 greatest pop drummers, I do them because I enjoy doing them and sharing them with younger people who may not be familiar with them. You have such access to so many things. But I want drummers in particular to know their history from 1900 to now. And during this period from I'd say 88, and grunge went all the way to probably 1998, and there were a lot of things in between, they have to be acknowledged. They were doing so many great things. And the guys I'm mentioning, I want you to know, all right? And let me know what you think. If you have anything, anyone else that I didn't think of. There's many others that I love, but nowhere near the ones I'm mentioning, and that's why I want to do this video, okay? So my best to you, and I got a lot coming on the technical side as well. My best to all of you for looking in. Take care.